Today we take on the short block assembly, walk through some of the parts because I've purchased them used, and get her assembled. Let's do it. Today I had fully set out to show you full long block assembly, but as you can see here, we basically went short block. And the reason for that being, we went through all the parts, thought I had everything, realized we were missing a couple things, primarily the main bolts on the front of the cam. We'll talk about that later in this video, but I want to get right into building the short block, showing you exactly how we set everything up, because we do have a few used parts that we're using, and we want to highlight how we check to make sure they're perfectly fine and good to go for this build. Let's get to it. So as you guys know, when we did the painting, we removed the main caps so we can have a nice flat top, easier to paint. We had to remove the main caps anyways for this aspect of the motor, but if you guys don't or already have your main caps in place, remove those two bolts. We used a pry bar along the side to loosen them up. 6 bolts? Oh, the 2 side ones too, huh?
Yeah, the ones that come from the side, and then 2 on each side.
I forgot about the side ones. See, I'm already failing. What we're installing right now is the main bearings. So these are the main bearings for your crankshaft. Crunk? That's a bad habit from him.
I guess if you're in that part of the world.
No. This is your thrust bearing. It's the only bearing that's going to wrap over both sides. All the rest just sit right in their journals. We're using King bearings. They are completely standard. There's no gapping, changes, anything. They're the standard LS7 bearings from King, and they snap right in. So
just line the tang up and slide it down into. Make sure it's flush. And that's all to it.
So this is technically the upper.
That is the upper.
Correct. So because we're upside down here.
And then you have to make sure you have all the holes in it for your oil galleys.
Yep.
That way it feeds the motor, because the other bearings are completely solid. So there's no holes in there, so it can't feed oil too.
So that's how you know which ones go where.
Exactly.
Good little pointer there. One thing to highlight is I wanted to save a little bit of money, and I was able to pick up some, should I dare say, lightly used? Well, let's just say proven LS7 crankshaft, pistons, and rods. Keep in mind, if you guys didn't know, the piston heads are aluminum, the rods are titanium, and the shaft is in pretty good shape, as you can see. It's been sitting in a tote for a little while since it came out of the car. Perfectly fine working motor. What Mike is doing right now, he's verifying all the clearances. So you want to do this whether it's brand new or used, never hurts, but you just want to verify all the clearances, because as Mike stated, it's a lot easier to do now than it is after you've assembled the motor.
That's a fact.
Fact. And Mike, what exact clearances are you looking for right now?
Basically, I just want to make sure that these bearing surfaces are well within spec. These are 2-100, these are 2-560. So that's just a factory spec for them, and then we'll go through and verify everything with the bearings as well to make sure that they're proper size as well.
Perfect.
That way, without the proper clearance, you're basically just going to be shooting oil everywhere, and then you'll never ever get oil pressure out of it.
So you line up the journal.
Yep, same way.
This side here, and then you push down on that side to get the
Make sure it's even.
bearing. Now this is the bottom bearing. And so Mike's gonna get these in, and then we're also gonna check the clearances on those, just to make sure everything's looking good. So as noted before, when we took these off and when we painted the block, these are numbered, and they do have an arrow pointing which way they go. Number 1 being here up towards the front, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you can see number 5 with the arrow pointing forward where it should be going. You want to make sure you follow that guideline, get everything in, because the way this block was made was in that specific order, and you don't want to mess that up.
Must be the luck of the...
Mike is checking the numbers. We're looking good.
Just about 6 down with the clearance.
So Mike, when you're testing the bearing clearances, do you just test the one, or do you test them all?
If this was a season block, I would do all of them, but because this is a GM block from Chevrolet, this is the same stuff that comes off the production line, so all the clearances are exactly the same.
So they do a line basically bore on that, right? So it's basically perfect.
$1 million CNC tools.
Yeah, must be nice, GM. Mike has a homemade concoction. I doubt he will share with us what it is because it's his own homemade brew. But it's his install oil. And so it lubricates stuff. I think he likes it because it's a little bit thicker, so it sticks in.
A little bit thicker than regular motor oil.
Yeah. So it will stay in place, especially for your motor if you're starting to build it and it's going to sit for a while. It's a great product for it. If you want some of this in your motor, it's going to cost you $1 million.
$1 million.
It's also the same stuff we use when we put the new cam in.
The wiggle stick.
The wiggle stick. Just set it in there. Now you know you have a problem when you set it in there and there's a big gap between the bearing and the but we just measured for that, so we're good, right?
Yes.
Okay, let's do some lethal assembly. So at least I could say I did something, right? So again, they're all labeled. Number 3 is gonna get the thrust bearing, which is this bad boy. And now the bolts, these bolts are torque to yield, so we're gonna go through that process here next.
So with the used block, you want to replace those.
Well, yeah, this is brand new block, so we're good, but on a used block, you'll want all new bolts. He's setting the block in place, then he's backing the bolts out so they're loose so we can do our torque. So it's set, we back it up, and then we can do our torque to yield. Many of you are probably used to doing this the old school way. Mike has a very high-tech way of doing it with his beautiful snap-on digital torque.
They actually call it a torque. A torque. Torque like a torque. They call it a tech wrench.
A tech wrench?
Yeah. So first step is 15 foot-pounds.
With all the bolts tightened up, we know everyone's gonna have different ways of doing things. You know, internet mechanics and real mechanics. Feel free to comment below on how you do things. This is how we're doing it, right? Do it. So, but in the instance, we fully recommend finding a great source to get all of your torque specs. You said All Data is a good one.
Yep.
Even potentially Jegs even has some of this data out there. So again, find it. But the way that we have looked up in the specs, 15 foot-pounds on both sets, inner outer, and then the insides were basically 15 the first torque, and then 80 degree turn on it, which would almost was about 80 foot-pounds.
Yeah, it was almost 80 foot-pounds.
And then the outside was 15 and then 53 degrees, which was about 65-ish, roughly. So obviously go with the specs and data that you have access to. The nice thing with Mike's tool that he just put away is it reads the degrees. So you know exactly where you're at in the turn and you're good to go. So crankshaft installed. Next.
Tacos.
So now that we have the crankshaft in, the next step is pistons. So as you can see, I have a big bucket of pistons. I did buy these used, came out of a perfectly working motor. And what we're doing here is we're leaving the pistons exactly they are. So the wrist pin and all that stuff's already installed on these, but we are replacing the connecting bolts, right?
The connecting rod bolts. Yes.
Connecting rod bolts. So these bolts are getting replaced. And then we're replacing the rings. Now, before we start putting rings in, internet mechanics, we know there's 1.5 million different ways. Mechanics have a lot of different ways. Machine shops, custom builders, like the Texas Speed Element, you guys all have different ways of how you like to approach this. Today, we're gonna go with the Michael Franz Red Barn Racing method. So we're gonna basically walk you through putting new rings in on the pistons and the full install. Now, I believe Mike has a tool to get those to go in there, and all the gapping and stuff are things that we need to talk about. So we're gonna get all into that here right now. we have the first ring, and I think for factory on these ones we're expecting about 16, right?
16.
So with the ring, we're gonna place that in the piston, and Mike has this little handy dandy, where'd you put it? Right here. So this gauge has it. I think he already has 16 slid out. Is this? Yes.
That is 16.
16. So if we're good, this will slide right in between. Now Mike also has a little handy dandy, what do you call this?
This is a ring square.
Okay.
So basically, you have two different piston rings here. Make sure you're paying attention which one you have. Your steel face is typically your top ring. Your Napier ring, which this is here, is typically your secondary ring. So this is top, second, and then you have your oil ring,
Which is that one right here.
It's compiled of 3 rings. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna put this in just like this. Take this guy right here, and that just squares it up in there.
So when he means square, it means the ring's not cantered or at weird angle or everything. So you have, it's perfectly sat in there. So with his tool, he can measure the ring gap. Where is it up top? Yeah. It's gonna be hard to see. Oh, you can see the gap right there. So that gap right there should be 16, right?
16.
So Mike's gonna take his tool. Let's see if I can. Slides right in. Perfect.
If you don't have a piston square, some of the old school techniques will work in this case. So you just take the top ring off of your piston and leave that ring out to where it's just hanging over the side, just like that. Take your piston, slide it in, and then that will also act as a piston square.
But we're expecting the second ring be between 18 and 20.
Yep, that's a little larger than 18.
So what would be too big of a gap?
And if it's over 20.
If it's over 20, that would be too big.
Yep.
4th gen.
Typically on big gap stuff, yeah, right at 20.
Mike's gonna triple check that one with the actual tool instead of a piston. But all that being said, we're gonna go through and check all the ring gaps, and we'll be right back with showing you how to put the rings and the oil ring onto the piston. So let's do that. The last one on this motor is the oil rings. They're really the smallest ones. They're the ones that sandwich between the waffle. What do they call that pattern? I've always wondered. Is there an actual name for it or not really? Am I just making a bigger deal?
I don't know.
Yeah, whatever. We made sure the oil rings were within 15 thousandths. So
The wafer ring.
the wafer.
The wafer.
Is that what we're gonna officially call it?
It's
That
a wafer.
that wing right there.
wafer wing.
That wing. So we know those rings have been fitted to that piston, and we know they're good. So bam, they're sitting there. Now we gotta do 7 more sets. Take your time on this part. Trust me, you don't want this to be wrong, because then you could say goodbye to either a sleeve or a piston or the entire block. You don't want that happening. So at this point, we have all of the piston rings gapped, or at least verified the gap on them all. So we're good to go. And being that this is a factory block, they are all identical. It's perfect. And keep in mind, this block was probably on a CNC machine that just bored each hole back to back to back to back. So, you know, when it's not a custom block or an old guy sitting in a garage doing it by hand, they should be very uniform and perfect, right?
Usually.
Typically.
Usually, we can get pretty close that way.
Yeah. So Mike, in the meantime, is pulling off the old rings. So can we say that my motor's already broken in, since, you know, it's got carbon buildup? Oh yeah, the rings haven't been seated. So yeah, so now we're gonna clean up and pull the rings off the pistons. We'll pull the bolts out because we got new bolts. They're somewhere on this table. We'll find out. Oh, they're here. So yeah, new bolts. And again, all Paradise Chevrolet. Huge shout out to Paradise. They provided every GM part going into this motor at a discounted price for the channel. So we definitely appreciate Paradise Auto. Hit up service, ask for Erik, tell him Lethal sent you, and he'll give you the 5-finger discount. Not free.
my finger?
Yeah, free. Well, no, it's not free. It's
Good
not free.
Lord. What are you
Sorry, Eric.
advertising?
Sorry, Eric. ParadiseAuto.com. In this instance, basically, we're assembling the piston. We're bringing them over to the block and sliding them in and connecting them to the crankshaft. So, because we bought used pistons and rods, we got new rod bolts and new rod bearings, connection bearings. So, Mike already jumped ahead and put one of the first pistons in, but the next one, we're gonna show you how we're putting the rings on, and the gaps are adjustments that we're doing to line those up appropriately, and then how we attach them to the crankshaft.
Cronk. Let's get Cronk in here.
In this instance, this piston here has its old rings still on, so we're peeling those off. And they basically come off the same way they went on. So pulling those off, and then we're gonna dry up the piston. We have piston in hand, all cleaned up. Again, yes, I know I'm using used pistons, but they're in great shape, minus just the tops having a little pre-carbon buildup. Those are from all the races where you beat me. So technically, you haven't beat me with your new pistons.
It smells like race gas.
It probably does. Terrible. Okay, Mike's gonna walk you through how he does his ring setup, how he positions them, and all that stuff. I'm gonna stop talking. Go, Mike.
So this is the first of the oil rings. You have a 3-piece oil ring. So you have 2 low tension rings, and then your, I guess, wafer ring is what we're calling it.
Yes.
So the wafer ring will go on first.
And where does that go on the piston?
The lowest gap, you have 1, 2, 3 gaps. So that one goes in first. And then usually I set these 180 degrees apart. So you put this one on, literally rotate over to the next side of the connecting rod pin. Put the other one on. And just like that.
It's all blurry, but hopefully you get the gist of that.
Yep. So I always set the rings 180 degrees apart. Next you have your napier.
And when you're saying the 180 degrees apart, that's the gaps that you're setting 180
yes, the
degrees
gaps.
apart.
So you can see where I've got the lowest gap here, set with the wrist pin. And turn it over, and then I have the other gap set with the other wrist pin. So now when I get into my secondary ring, this napier ring here with the dot facing up, always facing up, we'll connect that at 180 degrees over. A little gentle. I'm going to make sure that you kind of pull that up and over so you don't scratch the sides of the piston up. And always make sure that you find the dot before you put it on. Always find the dot first, then put your piston ring in. And then again, you can see the 180 degrees. Every other ring is showing. Flip it over, every other ring is showing.
Perfect. Now rinse and repeat on 7 other pistons.
So this is the piston ring compressor. I got this one here from Summit Racing. It's for specific bore sizes, so if you do a smaller or bigger bore, you'll have to adjust accordingly. But basically this slides in because it has a bevel, so it has a top and a bottom. Slide that in, nice and gentle, like that. And then it compresses all the piston rings, and now you're ready to slide into the bore of the motor. Okay, so whenever you're doing your rod bearings, not all rod bearings are like this, but these are standard bearings, and then you have one that's marked lower and one that's marked upper. Upper will always be the one that's on the connecting rod side. Lower will always be the connecting rod cap side. So, and then whenever you're dealing with titanium, you always want to verify that there are no scratches on the outside of the rod here, because these are coated titanium rods. Titanium is extremely strong, but it doesn't take friction real well. So whenever they start wearing through the coating on these, it eats the rods away. So you want to make sure that your coating is still in good shape and there's no odd wear or anything like that. And then make sure you're paying attention when you put your bearings in.
And that kind of goes into buying, since we bought used pistons, those were some of the things that we looked at before snagging them.
Yes.
Now, as far as installing it, we talked about when we installed the last piston, the direction and everything. Do you want to highlight again on how they sit on the crankshaft so you know which way it's pointed properly?
So you always want to make sure that this is away from the other connecting rod. So this will be the side that it goes into the fillet of the crankshaft, and this makes sure that you're riding completely on the crankshaft and not on the fillet. I've taken these apart before where people have put them in backwards, and it was riding on the fillet and it just ate the whole side of the bearing out of it. Ate the crankshaft up, the whole nine. As you can imagine, it doesn't last very long that way.
Lubing up the bearing.
A little lube in
Lining it up so the dot's in the right position.
And
this is where this tool is handy. So again, it compresses the rings, so hopefully it slides right in. Sometimes it's not perfect. See, every time I get the camera out, it hates us. Just like that. Now we need to go down low, push it all the way in, and connect the rod. I'm gonna get down low, big guy going down.
Oh, go down on it, big boy. Oh, snap. We're all crooked. There we go.
This is a great hand install.
It is. Oh, such a handy one.
There we go. Now we got to get the cap, and we're just gonna basically put the cap on, and then once we have all the pistons in, we will torque those bolts to their proper setting, and we'll be good to go. So rinse and repeat on all the other pistons. We got pistons in place. Now we got to get the caps torqued properly. So this is a 12-point bolt. So if you don't have a 12-point socket, you're gonna need one. You would have needed one anyways a while ago, even just to tighten them. I guess you could finger tighten them, but whatever. These are all in place, so now we are pulling up our torque sheet, and we're gonna get these torqued to spec and be good to go. At this point, we have our torque spec, so it's 15 pounds with 180 degree, almost full turn.
110.
Did you say 110?
110.
Let's do 180 anyways.
No.
Sorry, I misheard. So 15 pounds and 110 degree turn. So we'll see what foot pound that actually ends up being. But again,
foot pound.
Foot pound, pound foot. Feet, pound.
Guy likes pounding feet.
So when you tighten these up, Mike, what's your process? It's not, I guess left or right doesn't really matter. I guess you're just doing the pistons in that chamber.
Always start front to back, or back to front.
I was like, you just said front to back, and we're on the back.
Kill me.
Don't die. Don't die. So you got the 110 portion, or you got the 15 portion?
This is 15 foot pound. Switch over my unit.
He's calculating his digital thingy.
110. And then it'll tell me.
Bam.
33 foot pound.
Finally get my chance to tighten some bolts. I do 15 all around, good to go, going through the 110. And on this bolt, as you saw me coming around this way, my hand on the tech wrench basically unscrewed the battery and turned it off. Yeah, the one time I do it, I screw it up.
It would be you that turned it off?
It would be. I turned it off. Right. So, yeah, let's finish this off. This time I'll move it appropriately and not have to touch the end. Oh, I did 111.
At least it didn't snap off. That's why you replace those.
There we go. Today's rotating assembly video has come to an abrupt halt because of a few missing parts. It always seems like no matter how many times you've done it, when you make your list and everything, you're missing a couple things. We're missing a couple bolts for our cam that locks it in place. We're missing the timing chain damper. We're missing a couple of the block plugs for the coolant and for, I think, oil galleys. And then what was the rear one?
It's an oil diverter valve.
Yeah, the oil diverter valve. So we're missing that. So it's a weekend and it's late in the day now, and it's not something we can just go run down and get. The bolts we have to get, I think we're gonna get them from Comp Cam, and I think the other parts I can get from Paradise, just get them ordered. But usually Paradise will get the parts we need from them within a day or two, so we'll have to figure out when we can pick back up. I mean, we could technically slide the cam in, we could technically do a few other things, but I would rather do it all at once to create one cohesive video. So we will call this the short block assembly, because that's basically what we've done. We got a short block sitting in front of us. And I guess next would be the cam for the rotating assembly with all of the, really? He likes the motor. He's an LS7 fan. Stop it. So yeah, cam, lifters, all that great stuff still have to go in. We gotta get the heads on, and then basically the oil pump and the gears and all that stuff. So there's still quite a bit to do. I actually think this was a decent length video for what it is, so we'll call this the end of part 2 on the engine build. Short block assembly complete. Learned a lot today. Again, obviously Red Barn Racing Mike did 99% of the work today, but I'm learning. I learned putting rings on the pistons. Actually, I've done that once before, shockingly. I learned all the assembly of that. It's not overcomplicated from what I've learned, so it's just really checking clearances, making sure everything's good to go, so that way when you assemble the motor and get ready to fire it for the first time, you don't have a combustion of negativity. That would be bad. So short block complete. Next video will be getting the rest of that. So basically I think there's 2 more videos, so it's basically the cam and all of the valve train and all that stuff, and technically the heads, which are sitting right there, are already assembled per se, so there's not going to be a ton there, but we'll walk you through those steps because springs are springs. They're pretty easy, especially with all the tools out there. We actually have a special tool that was sent over, so we're going to include that in the video as well, show that off. But all that being stated, the motor's coming together. LS7 build happening. Just can't wait for all of the other stuff for the big gray machine right now that looks like it's gonna go pre-runner style because it's on little skates. What do you have in there? Oil pump. Well, don't steal my stickers. Stop ruining my he keeps putting stickers. Please don't put it on my car. Please. I want to keep my stickers. I need them for my toolbox. Stop it. Stop. He's gonna put it on the engine stand. He already painted it. We painted everything. I found out I painted my sandal. It's now orange. My other sandals over there, it's dry. They wipe right off because it was dry, but yeah, no. That's all I got. Till next time, guys. Or, well, I should say, comments, likes, shares, all those great things. Hit that subscribe for more content. And as always, guys, hope to see you on the road.